Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Dawn Bjork with K-Squared Technologies, and welcome to our monthly webinar training series. This month's topic is working with charts and graphics in Microsoft Excel. That is, how can we take sometimes very complex data and change it so that we can really visually communicate or summarize our information. And just as a reminder, this webinar, as well as our other webinars, are available as recordings on our YouTube channel. So make sure you check those out to catch up on any that you might have missed in the past. So what are we going to explore today? Well, let's go ahead and look at that. That is, of course, we want to get the basics down for creating charts. And how can we, what are some of the different options and the easy, quick ways to do that? And once we have our charts, what are some choices to quickly format them so that they can really be professional and communicate our content? One of the tricks that's also available is, let's just say you have a monthly report and you want it to look the same over and over again. You can then create a chart template. That means that you don't have to repeat all those formatting actions over and over again. You can instead apply that template. So we'll look at that as well. And then we'll touch on some specialty charts that are available, especially for those of you that maybe haven't created Excel charts for some time. And we'll wrap up with a graphic feature that is a different kind of chart. It's a little mini chart that exists in an individual cell, and these are called Sparklines. So that's where we're heading for today's session. Thanks for joining us. You're always welcome to drop your questions in the chat as we continue then to explore and to learn more about Excel charts and graphics. So just so that we get some of the basics out of the way, when we're creating charts, they can exist in two different ways. One is what's called an embedded object, an embedded chart. And that's what we see here with this example. This is a chart object that exists in a spreadsheet. It is sizable, it can be moved. And one of the advantages of having embedded charts is that you can actually have multiple charts within the same worksheet. So if you're wanting to provide comparisons or have other content that you want to share in that way. Another advantage here is that these charts can either be printed individually. And when I talk about printing these days, sometimes it may just be to a PDF, but it could also be to a physical printout. But they could be printed individually, or they could be printed as part of this entire worksheet, that is, with the data and the chart together. So that's an embedded chart. Now, a chart sheet is another option for us. This means that this is a chart that is actually in its own standalone sheet. It has the same features and functionality of an embedded chart. But what we see with this, then, one of the advantages, it is standalone. So it is just printed as it is, but it is able to maintain the proportions to fit into the page, whether you print it landscape or portrait. And so that gives us some advantages, especially if we want to annotate this chart. That is, if we want to add arrows, if we want to add text boxes and things like that, because this underlying chart isn't something that's going to be moved. So it becomes really easy, for instance, to go to insert. And within that chart, maybe what I want to do is go to shapes and add an arrow, for instance, and I want to call attention to this particular series of data. So that would be one of the things that I might look at there as well. So that's just the idea here of working with us. And of course, we can always modify here. This is the legend. So let's talk about some of the different parts of a chart. Here again, you may have a lot of experience with charting, but just to touch on this briefly here. So our legend is a way for us to be able to, of course, explain to others what we're showing visually. In this particular case, we're showing then different locations across a timeline. This is a column chart. So column charts, we have vertical bars. And in this column chart, it is also sometimes referred to as an XY chart. Now there's a different kind of XY chart, but by this is talking about the X and Y axes. So for this one, our X-axis, which is across the bottom, that is our horizontal axis, that is either going to be time-based or category-based. That means it might be for, as you see here, quarters. It might be years, months, days, or category. That could be locations or other types of codes. And so that's what we would see then in our X-axis or horizontal axes. Our Y-axis, our vertical, is going to be quantifying data in some way. It might be units, percentages, dollar amounts, but these are the two axes that we have in many of our charts. So this is a column chart. The previous example is a pie chart. These are often very popular. But one of the things to keep in mind for a pie chart is it can only work with one series of data. And it might be exactly what we want to, is that compare the different locations versus in this column chart, we're able to compare the different locations across multiple time frames. So that gives us more options with this. Other types of chart, XY charts would be things like a bar chart, which is then our horizontal bars. We also have line charts, area charts. Those are some of the more common ones, although there certainly are other options for that as well. Additionally, our charts, we can add titles not only to the chart itself, but to the different axes. We have our grid here. This is optional as well. And we have different ways to format or change the appearance or the color of this different data. So when we look at something like, for instance, this purple, this is a series. This is a series representing, in this case, Mexico. We also have others as well. So there's a lot of different ways to portray this information, but we're able to show this visually in a way that it might be hard to otherwise communicate, especially if it's a more complicated summary. So let's dig into this a little bit more. Now, I realize that you're likely comparing much more complicated data. Now, sometimes you may need to take that data and put it into another worksheet that summarizes it, or you might take the data and summarize it using a pivot table, and then pivot tables support creating pivot charts. So we've covered working with pivot tables in another one of our webinars, and so definitely check that out. But in this case, how do we select the data? Well, a couple things that are important with this is, first of all, make sure that you don't have any blank cells. Well, you can have blank cells, but blank columns or blank rows, because those will be plotted even if they create gaps. Now, in this case, what I want to do is just look at this data for the quarters and the locations. So notice I'm not including the totals. I might do the totals as a separate chart, but we're looking for data to compare. And so including the totals will skew or offset the data in a way that it probably isn't going to be as useful to us or as helpful. Now we can then create a chart. Now there's a couple keyboard shortcuts that might be just fun for you to know, although we're going to start it from we'll go in and do it in a more, we'll say, step-by-step process. So for instance, if I wanted to create a really quick chart sheet on my keyboard, I could hit the F11 function key. And now I have a chart sheet right there. I'm done. I could just maybe make a few modifications to, customize that title, and boom, we're done. So that was the F11 function key. Or if I wanted an embedded chart, that would be Alt and the F1 function key here again. Now you could tell someone else, hey, that just took me days to make it. And here, in fact, you just pressed a keyboard shortcut. As I mentioned, for an embedded chart, Alt F1. So that might be all you need to get started, and we could certainly take that further. But I'll select this and delete it just to walk you through a more, we'll say, traditional way of working with it. And that is by going to Insert. And then here we have the different chart options. Now, recommended charts is something that you might start with, although I think it can be more helpful once you're familiar with charts. If you already created charts, that might be a place to pop in and just see. So for instance, this is then a clustered column chart that we could then say that this is the one that we want. Or in this same tab for the insert, you can choose all charts. So now we have the ability to then look at different kinds of column charts and notice all of these other options. Now, some of these are very specialized, so even though they might look interesting, there may not be an application within your work and with your data. So you can certainly explore some of them, but even though they might look interesting, they may not really be appropriate. But we could move to a line chart. Now, pie chart, as I mentioned, is one series of data, a bar chart, area chart, and you can kind of see then the different options that we have. So let's stick with our clustered column for right now. And you'll notice that there's two presentations here. And basically, this one is just that we want to show that x-axis, we're showing the different locations, versus this one is, well, remember that could be category or time-based. So then this is showing it by time. So let's just pick that first one and okay. So now here again, we have a starting place. I'm just moving this, but because it's an embedded object, I could also select, grab the corners to size it, make it larger or smaller, and continue with it. So that becomes yet another way to do that. Let's look at another way to create for a moment. Once again, insert. And we come over here. Last time I picked recommended charts. If you already know that you want a column chart or a pie chart or a line chart, you can actually hover over and pick one of them from here. So that becomes another way. Or if you move to this dialog launcher, this little corner, that will take you basically to the same screen we were working with before, the same dialog box where we can select the various choices. So in this case, I'll move back. I'll just pick from here and choose this column. Now you might notice that there are some 3D options. And these can look pretty interesting, but one of the problems with 3D is it can kind of skew the proportions. So it can be hard to see the exact numbers that you're trying to portray within that chart. So, it's certainly something you can try, but you'll probably find that a two-dimensional will be more successful in your communication. So once again, because this is an embedded chart, I can move it, size it, and otherwise work with it. As I mentioned, drop any questions you have specifically into the chat and let me know how that might be helpful for you. So let's look at a couple other things that we might want to apply here. It's always good to know and keep in mind that each one of these elements of the chart is a selectable object. So for instance, the title is selectable. I could say, for instance, this is my 2021 trips. I could format that, make it bold, make it larger, all of those options. We also could look over on the right-hand side here and notice that by clicking on that plus, we could add other chart elements. Now, this option is also available in the contextual ribbon tab. Up at the top here is chart design, and over on the left-hand side is add chart element. So for instance, let's say that I want to put in a data table. So a data table, if it's fairly simple data, is a way to actually take that same data that would be in the worksheet and actually show it in the chart. And in some cases, that might be a great option for you. Or maybe I want to put in my axis title. So I selected that one. And that means that, for instance, and I'll size this, make a little taller here. Now I want to show then our tropical locations. I notice by having this selected, now we actually have another way to work with it. And this is through a pane that opens up for formatting. So when I'm in the title, these are my options. However, if I click on my legend, now I have other options for the legend. That would be one way to work with it. And you can see that there are some different choices here. So at this point then, I could choose, well, maybe I want to put that at the top, or it could be to the right. So these are very flexible options that are available to you as well. Another way to work with that though is I could also have right-clicked, and that would choose Format Legends. So let's say if this was closed, this wasn't open, right-click, Format Legend, and there it is. So know that there's a lot of different ways to get to these same elements. It gives you a lot of flexibility. We also can filter, you'll see this, and we can change our chart styles. Let's dig into a little bit more with our ribbon options, and we'll continue with this. So as you select different areas, this pane will open. It's sizable, so I'll make it just a slightly smaller here. And when we have a chart selected, here we see chart design and format. So these are our two primary ribbon tabs at the top for working with this chart. I mentioned briefly add chart element. And so here we can add a number of different pieces to this. We also could change here we have quick layout. So these are different layouts with some of these elements selected. You'll probably come up with something that is actually your preference, maybe a little different than what you're seeing here. We also have chart styles. Now, some of these, frankly, are way too busy. There's way too much going on there. And likewise here and here. So I'm not recommending these, just simply letting you know that these are possibilities. We really need to be very watchful. And I think I'll undo here. There we go. There are other chart styles, but as I mentioned, most of them there's just way too much going on. So now we could also change colors. Now this is coming from the themes and schemes that are part of this worksheet. So this would be one way to go. It also is impacted as well in terms of the formatting and layout of our worksheet. So that's another option as well for our design. But let's come back into this chart. So when it's selected, you'll see those chart layout options. I'm going to go ahead and create another chart from this, but it's always good to know that is, let's say I want these labels to be bold, for instance, I can simply select them, go to the Home tab and make them bold. So it's very simple there. Or if I'm in my chart design, you might remember that I had a couple different layouts I could pick. Well, here I could switch the row and column. So that becomes another option, as I might want to portray the data in a little bit different way. Or if I need to redefine the data, here is select data. I could even change the chart type. If I wanted, instead of a column chart, maybe I want to show that as a bar chart. So now I've changed that view. Now I'll undo Control Z for that, but you can kind of see the idea, and oops, look what happened here. So sometimes these choices can be quite involved, or I might decide to turn off those axes. So in this case, I might decide that I'm going to turn off the titles, and we might have better luck if we put them back in again. There you go. So those are always good to know that as well. Now here, this is an embedded chart. Talked about that as one of our options. Under Move Chart, we could change this to be a chart that we either want to show on a different sheet, or we want it to be a chart sheet. So that becomes an option here, or it could be an object that we move to a different worksheet. So that becomes another option if in your planning, then you realize that you'd like it to look or behave in a little different way. Let's look at creating another chart. In this case, this will be a pie chart. Now, talked before about how we want this to be related data, which is why we didn't include those totals. But what if we want to show those totals? We could put it into another worksheet, but we don't have to. So this is a handy trick for you to know. Whether you have totals at the very bottom of a worksheet or to the far right, you can actually grab those or bring those into a chart, even if the data is not contiguous or touching. Here's the trick. First, I'll select the labels. So I'm highlighted those labels. Now I want the data to be matching parallel range. So that could be a vertical range or horizontal range, depending upon what you have highlighted. Here's my labels. Now I'll hold Control and highlight this range. So they're matching parallel ranges. I did not hold Control for the first part, otherwise you'll just get a mess. Now, with that selected, we'll create another chart, insert. I want a pie chart, and I'll pick a simple 2D chart. Here again, we could make it three-dimensional, but let's start with a simple pie chart, and I'm showing those totals. Now, I'll move this down so that we can focus on this pie chart for a minute. A pie chart is simpler in many ways because we're only working with one series of data. But in this case, it's probably a little too simple. That is what is it that we need to know or want to know about this data? So let's look at, once again, chart design and chart elements. We could also add those with the plus over on the right-hand side. So data labels, that might be something would be really helpful. Let's try this if I put the data labels on the outside end. So now we know a little bit more information. Let's look at our chart elements here. Now we already have a legend, so it's at the bottom. You could keep it there or reposition it as is helpful. Maybe I want to do a little bit more with those data labels. So if I select the data labels, notice over on the right-hand side that it's giving me these options. But if this didn't display, you could then simply right-click and choose then that you want to format the data labels. So if it's not displaying, you have that option. Here we're looking then at the label options. And this is really helpful when it's a pie chart, because maybe you'd rather see this as a percentage. Maybe the value is not so important as the proportions for it. And it might also be helpful for you to have a legend key. Now, in this case, these are big enough, say, buckets or percentages. But the legend key can be helpful if you have some very small contributions. Maybe you're looking at different products or different departments. And in some cases, it has a small contribution to the whole. Well, then this legend key can be helpful if it's just a tiny slice. So that is one of the other things as well. There's also something that is in working with this as we can view our different options here, that you might decide you could put the names. There's something called leader lines. Now, we don't see that with this right now, but the idea, imagine that this is, rather than 8%, it's just 2%. It might be a very small slice. If I take this label, now I'm looking for a four-headed arrow, I'm going to drag this out, and that's what a leader line is. That's what it would show. So normally I wouldn't have a leader line, but because I might have moved that out, that's one of the other options. So that's another type of chart that we have, is then a pie chart. And we'll look at some specialty charts and some other options for you as well. When I have the charts selected here, once again, have a couple different options in terms of formatting, chart styles. And here again, you might find some of these might be a little bit too busy, but here's more of kind of a three-dimensional look to it, for instance, and you have other options. So definitely let me know how I can help you or help explain what some of this data does for you or what some of your options are. So those are a couple different kinds of charts with some different tricks to try. And a lot of it can be fairly intuitive in terms of moving things around, selecting, adding them, and working with them. So let's look at some other tips and tricks and things that will make these charts hopefully work a lot better for you. So we'll look at some combination charts, working with scale, and some other options as well. One of the challenges we have here, and in this case, I'll zoom out just a little bit and close this window for a moment. So here we have two different simple worksheets. And, you know, as we're getting to the end of the calendar year, you might have some comparisons like this as well. I have one chart for that data, and then I have another chart for that. And a couple different things that are a challenge. Maybe you're comparing two different months, whatever it might be. First of all, the scale is not the same because I have a little bit higher numbers for some of these values. And these are also not the same dimensions. So there's some quick graphic tricks that will make this work better for you. First of all, if we select this, let's look at our chart format ribbon tab. So we can see that over on the far right-hand side, these are the dimensions. What if we'd like both of these charts to be 3 inches tall and 5.5 inches wide? Because this one's a little bit different. So how do we do that? Well, I'll select the first one, hold Shift, select the second one. I won't do that. I'll select the first one, go to Format, and I'll make that 3 inches tall and 5.5 wide. Now I'll make this next one 3 inches tall and reduce the width. Now, that might be great, but now these two aren't quite lined up. So I'll select the first one, hold Shift, select the second one, and now we'll look at Shape Format. So these aren't being treated as individual charts right now, they are individual shapes. And in the shape format, and this applies not only for charts, but different images you might create or arrows and other shapes. Here's a line. So I can align these to the left. So now they are the same dimensions. They have the same alignment, so that can look a lot cleaner, and that might be a really handy trick. How do we fix the scale? I'll right click on this. Now here's the other thing too. If it's usually pretty easy to select, but if you're having, you know, it took me a few selections for this. So I could go to my Format tab here, and I'll click away from the chart. Format tab, and here in my drop down, what is it I want to select? I want to select my vertical value axes. But you can see that I could select a lot of other things here. The legend, the plot, a particular series. So now with one click or couple clicks, I have this selected. I'll right click on that. Whoop, lost it again, see? And here is format axes. So I could have gotten to this a couple different ways. As I recommend normally keep this window open, this pane, so that as you select different elements, it'll be there for you. So I'd like to set this as a maximum scale here of 15,000. So I'll change this to 15,000. And we have our major units here. That's where those little hash marks are, where the grid lines are. Well, I'd like that to be 2,500 because I think that'll make more sense here. And by doing that, sometimes it changes my minimum. So it's always good to check to make sure that it starts at 0, doesn't go somewhere else. And it's 2,500 for those marks. So notice how that's changed the view of this data. I'll do the same thing with this one. Once again, maybe in this case, I'll change those 2,500 here, and it changed it to 15,000 to be able to show that correctly. So now we have the same scale, and it can make it easier, whether it's top, bottom, side by side, to really be able to see what's happening, what the difference truly was with those. And it gives us a better sense of that. So that's one of the ways to work with that axes and have some tricks with it. Here's another trick in working with your data so that you can really show it in a way that easily communicates the information. Here I have some data where I've actually converted these numbers so that I can say that this is showing it in millions. So it's giving us this ability to show it, but that's coming from the original data. And that might not make sense because some of your data might not be always in millions, or you might not want to have to convert all of that. So here we have that same data, but it's actually being shown here in millions. And I'm showing that as well in my chart. Now, nothing wrong with this, but it may be more helpful, especially when you're dealing with large numbers, millions, billions, that you might want to actually change the scale. Change the scale. So I have this label that says in millions. I'll just select it and delete it for right now so it doesn't confuse matters here. I'm going to select this axes. And once again, if that was not easy, we could go to format and pick it in the dropdown. Next, I want to work with the scale options for that. And it's going, well, we'll go ahead and do it a little differently. There's format axis. Yes, I want to format that. There we go. Okay. Give me a moment. Got my units. There we go. Okay. So in this case, sometimes it might be helpful to change this. So what I'm looking at here are my options for my axes options. And because it's in the millions, here I'm going to change this to say display units as, notice here, hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, trillions. I'm going to display the units as millions. So now just notice that it's changed the display of that scale. And in this case, then, show display units label on the chart. So that might be much more meaningful and helpful for you when you have these really large numbers. It's just manipulating and working with the scale so that it is it's a more effective communication in terms of working with it. So hopefully that it's inspired you and gives you some ideas in terms of how you might work with it. Let's look at a couple other options that we have. Now, here we have I'll come back to this particular chart that we have created. I'll make my pie chart a little bit smaller so you can see this more easily. And let's say that there are some things that we want to do to make this be clear, easier to work with. Maybe we've changed the color. There could be any number of things that we have or that we want to do with this. So let's just say, for instance, I've changed this to be blue. And maybe I decided that I don't want to have the grid lines. So I can go to my grid lines, my chart element grid lines, and go to my grid line options here. And maybe I say no lines. Okay. One of the reasons why that can be helpful is if you're using, especially if you take this and if you're working in PowerPoint, it's the same features. This can make it cleaner or streamlined. So I've made a couple different changes to this, and there could be more as well. And it's just some different options that you have will make this easier. So if this is like, oh, this is so amazing, I just love the way this looks, and you don't have to tell me that. You don't have to compliment me on that, because I just want to show you very quickly the idea of a chart template. How can we save these different appearances? What are some options for us in terms of working with it? So what we're going to do is go back to our chart design and say change chart type. So I'm actually not going to change the type, but you can see how it's formatted. And now I'll go to templates. Whoops, forgot. That's not how I want to do it. I'm going to right click on this. There we go. Right click on this chart and say save as template. I just jumped ahead of myself. I'm so excited. So save as template. Now, this will take us into a place. This is kind of interesting. This is local, and it is not something you can make as a network, although you can certainly copy some of these to other people. So you'll notice here that this is then going to a specific location that is local to my computer and my login. And in this case, then I might call this my column chart blue. And you could get very specific. Maybe it's a monthly report, something like this. So I can save this as a format, whatever it is about that. Now, let's just say, for instance, I want to use that format on a different chart. So here's this chart sheet I created before. All I need to do is, with that chart selected in chart design, I'll go to change chart type. And here is templates. So I could have quite a large variety of templates that are available for different kinds of charts. My monthly report, a pie chart, a bar chart, whatever that might be, with the colors, with my different preferences for the layout. But notice, by simply selecting this, pick it, sure I will, and say okay. And notice how it changed it. It changed the colors, the grid went away, all sorts of different options. It could be the position of the legend, all of that would change. Even my title is bold. So it's the formatting in every way. That's a chart template. So the key with that before, and we looked at that, is that we went to that chart, right click, save as template. It goes to a local location. Be as descriptive about the type of chart, the purpose, color, or formatting, so that you can use those, and you can always overlay. They go to a specific file format called a .crtx. And so this is something that you could go to that location. You may have to unhide the view of that folder if you wanted to share them and have them be on other people's computers as well. So that's the idea of a chart template. And hopefully that gets you inspired in terms of what's possible. Now let's look at a little bit more here with chart templates. And then we'll look at some specialty charts and wrap up with Sparklines. So I have a bunch of data here that is, when I say bunch, many, many, many rows of data. I created from this a pivot table to summarize that data. And as I mentioned, there's some different ways for us to work with that. And then in a pivot table, and we have another webinar training on pivot tables. In that pivot table, I could go to my pivot table analyze tab, and I would be able to, from this on the right-hand side, create a pivot chart. So it has the same features, but it's based upon the pivot chart versus just selected worksheet data. And from here then, let's say I want that to be a bar chart. So I'll select that, choose OK. And here I have this bar chart. Now, a couple things I might want to do. Maybe I want to sort this data so that it is from high to low. And then that would change the way the chart shows. Maybe I need to show that scale a little bit differently as well. Or maybe I don't need to show that legend. So that's one of the things that I might say is that the legend's not helpful. So I'll take that out, and that helps me give me a little bit more space to work with it. So there's some different options there. I could select this data as well. And with this then, in terms of, that is, the whole idea is to find different ways that you can work with this data and have it be helpful for you. So I've selected that series. And remember, it doesn't have to be with a pivot chart. It could be for another. Selected that. And now in my formatting, and if I didn't have that available, I could right click and say Format Data Series. In the format here, there's something called gap width. And you may have tried to do this or be curious about that. That is the width between each one of these bars. So I want that to be a lot smaller. Maybe I only want that to be 50%. What does that look like? That might be a lot better. So you could play around with these, and once again, you can make them into a chart template. Let's look at another example here. So here is a similar, the same data basically, a similar layout. Now it's an orange. It's sorted, the data itself, that is the chart template won't store the order of the data, but I've changed the gap width, I've changed the color. Maybe I'll format this, make it bold and larger, okay? And let's make this into a template. I'll right click, save as template. Call this bar monthly report. Okay. So now I've got that. If I did want to then apply that, here is that other chart I just created. All I need to do then is go into that design, change chart type, go to templates. here's that wonderful report. You don't have to tell me it's wonderful, but I'll select it and okay. And now very quickly was able to apply the formatting for the title, the color, the gap, all of that. Hopefully that's really inspiring you to give you some great ideas. Let's wrap up by looking at some specialty charts and then Sparklines. And I hope that you already are seeing some really helpful options. Just to explain what I'm doing here, I'll right click, move over to my little arrows in the bottom left-hand corner, right click, and this will help me to quickly move to other sample worksheets. So in this case, I have a data where I'm comparing what's actual versus projected. Now, it might be helpful for me to see it in a little bit different way, what's called a combination chart. Right now, we're seeing it as a column chart. So I'll select the chart, and with this, I'll go to chart design and simply say change chart type. Now I'm going to pick this right up front, but change chart type. And we'll go to a combo. So Excel's really trying to help us. This used to be much more complicated. But in this case, by going to a combo, we can look at this and say, yeah, this is what I want. I want my projected to show as a line. Now you could change it to something else, but we'll keep it as a line so that now I can maybe draw some conclusions a little bit more easily by simply seeing that as a line versus two bars side by side. So that's a combination chart. Now we also might want to do a combination chart when it's very dissimilar information. So let's look at that. In this case, I'll highlight all of this data, but I've got sales versus sales staff, and I want to try to get a sense of whether or not that's really, if I bring on another salesperson, does that make a difference? There might be all sorts of questions I have about that data. So I'll insert, I'm going to add a chart, and the way I'll get to this is through that little dialog launcher. I'll go to all charts and I'll pick combo because I know right off the top that I want this to be a combo chart. Now, if we look at this, that's not going to be very helpful because it's just going to be a line for the sales staff. It's such a small number, it really won't show it. But a combo chart gives us the option to show one of those series on a secondary axis. So I pick this, and now I've got a much different way of showing this data. It creates another y-axis, a secondary axis that is now scaled to that so that we are able to show sales stat versus sales results in our chart. So that is another combination chart that might be really helpful for you in working with it. There are other kinds of charts that might be useful. There's a waterfall, for instance. This can be helpful. Notice I did make it blue on purpose, but notice this idea. So a waterfall shows it as accumulation, that is, it's building up. So rather than having these all build from zero, it's showing the accumulation to that total. And there might be some applications where that is helpful as well. Please share your questions if there's anything I can clarify for you in working with us. And I hope that you've gotten a chance to see a variety of different things that are possible, everything from creating charts from scratch to also being able to create templates, to being able to change the scale, the formatting, the layout, all of these things that can certainly enhance and improve your communication, especially with complex data. So definitely consider what those takeaways might be and what would be helpful for you to be able to apply for yourself. Let's wrap up then by looking at something called a sparkline. Now, a sparkline is a chart, but it doesn't use the same features. We notice that when it's a pivot chart, it is using the same feature set. We just are building our data from a pivot table versus just from a worksheet. But with a Sparkline, although it's a chart, it's not sharing the same features that we've covered so far. There might be situations, though, where it would be a perfect solution for you. With a Sparkline, we're going to actually put little mini charts in these cells. So it becomes a visual in a case where maybe a chart is more than you need, but you do want to show some trends over time. So with that, unlike what we had with the chart, if it was a chart, we would have selected this data because we want to include the labels. For this one, we're going to select only the values and it'll include the totals. Now for this example, I'm going to put the Sparklines to the right, but they could be at the bottom. They could be above. We just need to create a place for those to be displayed. So those are some different options for us in terms of how we work with it. One. All right, so let's go ahead and with this selected here, remember I'm only selecting the data and we can select it as well when we move into the Sparkline. So you don't have to do it ahead of time. Under Insert, here we have Sparklines over to the right-hand side. There's line, column, and win-loss. Win-loss is typically for stocks. I'll pick line. Now, if I hadn't selected that range, we would do it now for the data range. Next, we say for Sparklines, where do I want to put them? In this case, it will be a matching parallel range. So this is similar to what we saw with the other charts. It could be to the right, below. And now let's see what a Sparkline is. And that's a Sparkline. How many of you will use that? That's can be a really, it's kind of a hidden feature. It's been around for more than 10 years, and it's often something that is a new discovery for many people. So with this, then we can select anything, any one of these, and notice that we have a contextual ribbon tab for this. I'll pick high point and low point. Those are options. But notice that now I'm able to kind of call attention to them. And we even have different styles. So maybe I want to change the colors so that the high point's green, low point's red. But you can see then how these Sparklines might be a really great way to visually communicate this data without a lot of complexity. That's the idea of Sparklines. Now we'll keep I think a line works best for this data, but you could pick a column. That would be another option. And you have a few more features here for how you could control the appearance. Let's look at one more example of Sparkline and we'll wrap up. Once again, we'll select only the data. We have the labels there because we don't really need to select the labels because it's going to be in place. We choose Insert, pick the type that you want. I'll try column for this. Where do I want to position it? Over to the right. And then we'll choose, okay. Whoops, but I had the total selected. That was my mistake. Okay, I'm going to go ahead then and undo that. And you can see we have to be watchful of some of these things. Or we have the option to show it below. But in this case, I'll select that, Insert, column. Where do I want to put it? Over here on the right. And then okay. So once again, we have the ability to format this any way we want, but you're able to visually see this in a quick, easy way. And we could color code for high points or low points, whatever that might be, and pick different styles that would show those for us. But that gives you hopefully some great ways to be able to communicate your data more effectively in Excel. As we wrap up, I hope you take some time to just consider what are the things you're going to try next. Maybe it is to create a chart template to be able to save time when you are creating that same chart every month or every week so that you're able to work with it. Or perhaps it's working with Sparklines or exploring some of the other options that are available, perhaps maybe a new combo chart. Whatever that is, take some time to explore that and to see what your options are for that. We're going to continue our training options in Excel as we move into next year. So in January and February will be webinars on the top essential functions that we have in Excel. Some really key functions that will help you to be able to get better answers and to be able to get to those hopefully much more easily. So it'll be a wide range of functions because there are so many options. There's over 500 functions, and we will not be covering all of them. Then this is the 2-part. And as always, these sessions are recorded so you can go back to review, or if you aren't able to join us, that you will have the opportunity to view that training and really benefit from it. So I hope that you will be able to join us in January and February for those sessions. So we offer these once a month on the second Tuesday of every month. And when you finish in a few minutes, you'll see a survey pop up on the screen. This is an opportunity to let us know what topics you'd like to see in the future for this. We certainly, always a pleasure to work with you. Today, we've had the chance to explore charts and graphics in Excel. We want to know how we can help you. That is, reach out, let us know how we can help you to be more productive. Also, let us know how we can support you with IT services and consulting to more efficiently and productively use your Microsoft technology. I'm Dawn with K-Square Technologies. Thanks for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next month.